meeting. So welcome everybody. Welcome to the December Ordinary Council meeting. 6:05, I'll open the meeting. Kaya Marman, Kaya Yoga, Kaya Bridie, Yananuk, Nalak Kadij Winjalak Nini, Nalak Kadij Nija Bujabal, Wajak Nunga Bujalalak Nini, Kora, Nijie, Gorawan. On behalf of the town of Bassendean, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners. The traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Wajak people of the Noongar Nation. May their campfires burn forever. I would also like to remind people that our meetings are recorded and uploaded to the town's website and YouTube. Announcements by the presiding person. I would like to announce that two of our long-serving staff members, this will be their final Ordinary Council meeting. So we have our minutes clerk, Amy Holmes. Wave, Amy, so that everyone knows who you are. So Amy has been a huge benefit to Council over the years, and we will absolutely, sincerely and utterly miss you and your ability to compose our amendments as required. The other young lady sitting next to Amy is Libby Cania. Wave, Libby. Libby is our governance officer and is also a valued member of the team and will sincerely be missed. Both ladies are heading off to career changes that will be very beneficial to other areas of the workforce, but not necessarily us, though unfortunate. Thank you, ladies, for your service and your time. It's much appreciated. We'll move on to attendances, apologies, and application for leave. Well, obviously, we have Councillor Flicker, who is attending the meeting online. I don't believe we've got any apologies for tonight. Applications for leave of absence, councillors. We are a dedicated group. Okay, declarations of interest, councillors.
Yes.
Councillor Flicker, and your declaration of interest.
Yes, in relation to the item concerning 168 West Road, I've taken advice from the CEO, and it would appear that I may have an impartiality interest to declare in relation to that. The substance of that is that when that property became available for sale, I did inquire with the owner as to what his intentions were for that property. At that stage, he had indicated it was demolition. I had made some inquiries as to how that property might be salvaged in some way. As a result of those investigations, it became apparent that transport and remediation of that house was prohibitively expensive. That had been communicated to the owner that I have no desire to acquire that property. It was just that there was that background. So it's certainly not looking to interact on that property in any way, just to indicate that those discussions had occurred. So there was an impartiality, notwithstanding that impartiality interest, I believe I can participate and can vote and make decisions having regard to that.
Thank you, Councillor Plivka. We now move on to deputations, and I believe we have a deputation from Norma. Stan, sorry.
I'm representing Norma, thank you.
Okay, so you're doing a deputation, are you, Stan?
Well, I don't know what a deputation is. I was asked to come in tonight. Not here.
Okay. We were advised. Okay, so basically, if you wish to speak to the item and to indicate the position of the 55 plus group, you're more than welcome to come to the chair at the end of the table here and provide the councillors with some information. After you've done your deputation, the councillors can ask you questions. So take a seat, sir.
So, thank you. My understanding is that we've been approached by council, this is the 55 plus, to take over the bus service, that is the community transport bus service. We, in our capacity, believe that we can run it safely and with regard to what Bassendean stands for as well, also provide a bus service for the people of Bassendean. That includes, of course, Ashfield and whatever other we've got in here. I do wish to point out that we have got a very good committee. Norma this year actually, I was going to say last year, was provided or awarded the council award for best, I forget what you call it actually.
I think it was
Community leadership, that's what it was.
That's it, yes.
So I think, being my wife as well, 40 years, I think we can run it. She's got a good backup. She's got a very good set of people that run it. We've got one lady who has already indicated that she would take over the chair insofar as make sure that everything is cohesive and runs properly, so that we do provide that service.
If I could just interrupt councillors before you start, I will make a correction at the beginning there. Norma indicated to me in a conversation that she had asked about the community transport service with a staff member and was unsure of how to proceed, and I said to her to put that in writing. So I believe that she has made a request in writing to the administration. I think that request came through yesterday or the day before. I can't remember which day it came through. So, and I do know that Councillor Carter and I actually ran into Norma. You ran into both of us. So,
I was told about that.
Yes, so that was down at Holly Ray's. So, yeah, so that's the that's the context around that. So the council administration, as far as I know, have not requested the 55 plus to take over the service.
Yep.
But it is obviously, because you're next door.
Yes.
There is an interesting aspect there. So Councillor McLennan. Yes.
Thanks for coming along tonight. From the email that your wife sent to us, it sounded like there'd been some discussion with the committee and that the committee was on board, as you indicated. I'm just wondering, were there any supports that the committee identified that you would need in order to be able to successfully run the service?
We're in a bit of a space area, I suppose you could say, that we're not quite sure of what we're going to get insofar as what we're going to run with, how we're going to put forward. But based on your own figures and values down here of the running of the community transport service, we would certainly be able to duplicate it. There's no problem in that regard. Plus, if we do get it where we can actually exchange the buses to something that is a little bit reasonable, because the one that we've got our own, I think it's a 10-seater, and it's just not suitable. It's old, it's got no seat belts.
Is that one that
this is
55 plus?
Yeah, the 55 plus, yeah.
And in the discussions with the committee, were there any concerns that were raised?
I think the only concern that we've got is that that people were paid as a volunteer to do the job. I mean, I'm a volunteer, I don't get paid, and these people were getting paid to have lunch or whatever it is that council paid out last year, $7,900 or so. I've never heard of that. We've got one bus driver on our team, that's the 55 plus. I don't think he's going to continue on, and that's only because he gets paid every time he goes out. He gets a meal, free meal, be it $20 for the hotel or $40 at the hotel. So I mean, to me that's not a volunteer. And, you know, you've got to look at the guidelines on that, and the guidelines is if you're a volunteer, you do it for free. You do it for the love of the people.
Thank you.
Councillors, Councillor Carter.
Oh, thank you again for coming in. The thing that interests me is what you would need from council to support this. And I'm thinking in terms of things like insurance, office support, things like that, which doesn't necessarily impinge on the administration staff.
Sure.
Have you thought about what these sorts of...
It's been tossed around, yes, definitely. We are under the umbrella of Bassendean Council with insurances, so there's no problem there. I think the only thing is that what office space are we going to get? Can we install a person in that space? What computers are we going to come with as well? And whether or not those same people that we've got currently on the books can still be utilised, whether they wish to come across as well. That's the other thing. And we'd have to turn around and give them a new contract that, hey, you don't get a free meal now. You are now working for the 55 plus. And, you know, you're doing something or putting something back to the community, like I've done for many years.
So, can I just ask a question? You mentioned the old 10-seater bus.
Yep.
My understanding from 6 months ago when I did a presentation down at the 55 plus group, I did hear that you also had a 6-seater bus that sits at the depot. Now, those vehicles sit at the depot most of the time.
Yes.
Okay. They're both old, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
Right, okay. And I believe the 6-seater bus hasn't been used for over a year.
I would say that would be right.
Okay. So these coaches, buses, so at the moment you operate a tour once a fortnight with
Correct.
a 10-seater bus.
Yep.
And you own the buses?
Yes.
So taking on the transport service, what you're looking for is vehicles that could accommodate both your transport for your fortnightly service and also for the transport, the community transport. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Right, okay. So you'd be looking to the town to supply those vehicles?
If possible, yes.
Okay. Okay. What would you do with the old buses? Would you have the town sell them or would you sell them? What would you do with those?
I think they could be traded in rather than, well, we've got no value for it. If we're going to get new buses, we might as well get rid of them and, you know, do them as a trade-in rather than just outright sale, because no one's going to buy them on an outright sale.
So the vehicles that the town currently uses for the 55 plus are 7-seater.
Yeah. Mitsubishi?
7-seater. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So you'd be combining some of the services.
Yep.
Okay. Okay.
I think we can provide a good service there too. The unfortunate part is that we would only service Ashfield, Bassendean, or the town of Bassendean. We wouldn't turn around and go all the way up to Murdoch or, you know, places like that. And if we did, then, you know, we lose a bus. So we'd have to turn around and ask the people, you know, go and get my care or people who care up the road.
But you would potentially do Midland Hospital.
Oh yes, definitely. That's it. Yeah.
Okay. So that would be details that you would work out
Oh,
on how
certainly.
you would manage the service.
Yes,
Okay.
certainly. Yep.
Okay. Would you see the potential for your organisation to expand the usage of the service? And I believe that Norma was keen to get more people doing healthy activities and classes. Is that part of the...
That's still on too.
Okay,
Yes.
right,
Yes.
okay. Thank you. Councillors, other questions?
Another question. And, thanks for coming in, Stan. So probably a very important aspect of our community. So yes, it's awesome that the 55 Plus Association is willing to put their hand up. It sounds from my perspective and being a business owner myself, it's very important to have things in writing to ensure that if you are presenting to either funders or support mechanisms, obviously the administration and the council, is anything being put in writing at this point in time? You say that you've got the capacity to do so. Do you require any funding? What happens if staff and individuals go down in regards to the service? Do you have any contingency plans? I know I'm speaking
Hypothetical.
because
Yeah.
we're going to make a decision on this
Oh,
and
sure.
relinquish it. Some things in
I
black
think-
and white need to be sort of put into place.
I
pretty
think
quickly.
with our skills that we've got, if I might just explain that I am a member of the Marriage Settlements Association. I'm a life member. I was their CEO. I ran the place, computers, everything else. The law, as far as what the Attorney General implied upon us. So our skills, both Norma and mine. Norma was a team leader at Smith Snack Foods. Heaven help, is still operating. And both of us have got those skills, and we can put them together. And the staff that we've got, well, those are on the committee, are very good as well.
Do not discount your current skills, qualification,
Oh,
and
no.
experience. Absolutely not. But what you say and what actually gets put down on paper can be two different things.
Oh yeah, sure.
So I think before anything can be really propped up or supported by the administration or us as a council, there have to be some documentation to say, okay, what are your plans? What are the plus 10% scenario? What are the contingency plans? Because we are
Is
dealing.
that necessary?
Me personally, I feel absolutely we are dealing with a demographic in our community
Sure. Yep.
that changes very rapidly.
Sure.
People's health go down quite quickly.
Yes.
Things be done in an emergency situation in regards to getting a member of the community from A to B very, very quickly.
Yep.
So I think these types of thought processes to ensure that all contingencies are taken care of are put into place.
Sure.
But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how we can work with each other.
Sure. Yeah, sounds good.
Thank you.
Other questions, councillors? Thank you, Stan.
Thank you.
Okay. I believe there's no other deputations. Okay.
I submitted, maybe they're just questions.
We've got question statement time to come.
Yep. I don't know if it was a deputation or not. I don't know what a deputation.
A deputation is a more in-depth speech like Stan has done, although I understand that Norma couldn't come tonight because there's some Christmas. Yes, right, okay. So that's where all the seniors are. So we are going to move on to statements. So we're moving on to statement time now. And Stephanie, isn't it?
Yes.
Stephanie. Public statements. So Stephanie, you've sent public questions, so I'll leave you to the next stage, but you can make a statement as well. But I'll go to Mr. Ashley Harris. Sorry, my eyesight's so, if you'd like to go to the microphone there, sir, if you state your name and address, and then we'll move into the statements, sir. So, your name, sir?
Ashley Hams, 14 Carradale Glen, Hillaries.
Yep.
And I submitted a statement. May I ask the question, do I need to abide precisely by the statement which you have all received?
Not necessarily, no.
Right. The purpose of speaking is for those who may not know, I'm the executor of the Margaret Joan Hams estate at 168 West Road in Bassendean. And my name is also Hams. We're second cousins, so part of the family. But the task of enforcing and executing Joan's will to the 53 beneficiaries, many of whom are local people and businesses. However, the process has been a problem for us because Joan anticipated that the property would be demolished, as so did the rest of us, for many reasons, and all of which you have dealt with, including last week's discussion. And our architect's report that came in, and if I may quote a portion of that the current location and condition of the Hams homestead cannot effectively serve the town of Bassendean in terms of retaining the place as a heritage asset to the town in situ as it stands. And as was mentioned earlier in the meeting, we have investigated relocating it, moving it forward, subdividing it and selling it. And so far we are well and truly at the stage of having no interest in the property and certainly no financial interest from the estate's point of view, with a renovation cost in the hundreds of thousands of dollars for somebody to take it on, which lowers the property to lower than land value for the sale for the 53 beneficiaries, which makes it a very difficult process. In the attempted marketing of it and in dealing with your staff, we ascertained that we cannot build a carport or anything else in front, which wrote off of the 1% of the market who are interested in such a property. That took them right out of the market because it retains the dilapidated rose garden that I've tried to maintain for 6 years, and it's just about dead now. If you drive past the end of summer, we'll see the end of that rose garden. There's no maintenance maintaining the home so it doesn't collapse. It's structurally sound, quite correct. It's just simply not saleable. We're looking at the subdivision of it, and that's simply to move the boundary from underneath to the back. I've spent 2 hours today with one of your local real estate agents to ascertain that. So apart from the $10,000 we've already spent, that's another $19,000 to consider what we could do to get that property onto the market, as we understand is council's desire. And having listened to last week's discussion period about funding for retention of properties, it was obvious that there's no money likely to come from anywhere else, and there's no money in the estate. So we're going to borrow funds at this stage to try and ascertain getting a subdivision done, putting it on the market for a 2-month period, which meets your February deadline. And at that February deadline, on behalf of the 53 beneficiaries, I would be asking council to reconsider the heritage listing, deregister it, in fact, take it away from the classification 2 or any classification whatsoever, and allow it to be demolished. And that way we can move forward. So that's the purpose of my visit, and putting a name to a face so you know who you're dealing with in the future.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Are there any other people who would like to make a statement?
And
thank you, Ms.
1993 Bassendean. Thank you for coming around and finding your interest. This situation with the transport has upset many, many people, myself the most, because I, Gwen Fennick and Tina Klein, proposed this 40 years ago, and our wishes were always done for the last 40 years. The gentleman said that it would only be for Ashfield, Edenville and Bassendean. That's all it always it was. There's a real misconception out there of what we've done, what is going on. And whoever decides, is there a committee, please take everything into effect that goes on. Saying you can only go to Midland Hospital, unfortunately, you tell the government that. People are booked at Midland, then the next minute they're told to go to Joondalup or whatsoever. We are talking about senior people with problems, heart problems. I've been in that situation. I have to go to Mount Hospital. Am I just going to be left on the floor? So please think about all that.
Right, any other statements, please? Okay, with that, we'll move on to question time. I do have one question that I'll read out first for someone. I don't believe Andrea Hamworth Booth is in the chamber. So I'll read out this question. It's in relation to 12.9, proposed targeted underground power program. Could council please advise what the residents of Elsfield Way and other streets that already have underground power will get in return for the $2,000 per household they will be required to pay? Okay. Sorry about that. Would you like to read it out?
Through Madam Mayor, as contained in the attachment 12.9.6 in the appendix of the officer report, the response is that many properties in the project area already have an underground consumer mains connection, meaning that an overhead conversion is not required. An underground consumer mains connection is the connection that runs from the green dome to the property. As shown in the preamble to the community survey, properties with an existing underground consumer mains connection are likely to receive a significant discount to the standard charge, so property owners will not be required to pay twice for the same thing. However, the town is required to contribute to the cost of undergrounding the Western Power network, which all property owners within the project area are likely to be required to contribute to. That is the LGA contribution of 27% shown in the orange table in the preamble to the survey.
Thank you. Now I understand, Stephanie, you have questions. If you would like to come to the microphone, state your name and address and ask your questions.
Stephanie Hammersley, 75 Broadway, Bassendean. I think some of the questions have already been answered by receiving minutes. Will the results of the survey be available to the public? If so, when and where? Will they be posted online?
They're actually in the attachments to the agenda. They're publicly available already.
Okay. When will the town of Bassendean be making a decision regarding the underground power? When's the final decision to be made?
Well, tonight is to decide to go into, or whether or not to go into an MOU with Western Power, which will then allow Western Power to do more detailed designs.
Yep.
And also
What
to
did you
provide
call it? An MOU. What's that?
memorandum of understanding.
Okay. For more information.
Well, it allows Western Power to progress to the next stage, which allows more detailed design, which will firm up the some of the pricing, define the area more, just to make sure that the area boundary is 100% correct. It's about going to that stage where we get more details.
So when will the decision about when is the final decision made? When is the discussion closed?
Well, from the community survey point of view, the survey that's attached to
I mean, the decision is, when does the town of Bassendean...
when Western Power come back with the information, which will probably be around about, reading the documents and from memory, I think it will be around about March next year.
Okay.
But that's just a guess estimate.
March prox. Yep.
Can I just check with that?
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. All these information is in the report, Council.
Yep. But coming back up.
Do you mean this?
Yes.
So you can't tell me if it's going to be approximately March next year. I have to read 500
Yeah,
pages.
it is actually in there. I just need confirmation whether my memory is correct or not. It will vary as well because it's very dependent on Western Power and their contractors as to how and when they come back with that information.
I'm just wondering when the discussion is closed to the public.
Through Madam Mayor, the current stage is for Council to enter into a memorandum of understanding, as we've discussed.
Yep.
Then what will happen is Western Power, once that occurs, or if that occurs tonight, Western Power will go and conduct detailed design for the project. And then they will come back to the town with what they call a co-funding agreement.
Yep.
Now, that will have much more accurate details of the project and the potential costing, and that will be accurate to within plus or minus 10%. The current information that we have from Western Power is only accurate to plus or minus 30%. So they call that an E30, and they'll come back to us with an E10. That will come back to Council for a decision to be made by Council as to whether or not to enter into that co-funding agreement. If Council enters into that agreement, then we expect that to happen in early 2024. So it's still some time away yet.
Oh, sorry.
So
I misread that. I do apologise.
So if
council at that time decides to enter into the co-funding agreement, Western Power will then go out to contract for the works.
That's okay. I just want to know when the public has no further input into the decision-making process.
So if council decide to enter into the co-funding agreement in early 2024, that will feed into the budget process for 24-25. So the final decision in relation to council in terms of its effect on property owners will be likely to be made as part of that budget process, which
So
is
early 24.
be June 2024.
Okay. I have a further question. It's a legal contract question. If I have no contract, formal written contract with the town of Bassendean, why am I legally obliged to pay the so-called service fee that is suggested to be charged for the underground power? If I have no contract.
Through you, Madam Mayor. So if council has the ability under the Local Government Act to impose a service charge, it can do that as part of the budget process, which is what we would be recommending should council decide to enter into the project. And that service charge is payable to the town. And if it's not paid, it becomes a debt due to the town and can be collected as any other debts due to the town can be collected.
And debts that where there is no contract can't be collected. So the next question I have is, my understanding from this letter from the Attorney General Robert McClellan, no relation I'm sure, in 2010 states that in 1988 4 proposals to amend the Constitution were put to voters in accordance with section 128 of the Constitution. One of those proposals sought to give constitutional recognition to local government, but the proposal was not carried. The Constitution does not currently recognise local government. Any change to the Constitution to recognise local government would need approval by voters at referendum. So I understand that there have been 2 referendums, and both of those referendums, the people of Australia said they did not want to include local governments under the Constitution. So in that regard, given that the Constitution is the highest law in the land, it appears that local governments have no legal standing. If that's the case, how can local governments therefore be charging and enforcing rates, let alone service fees, for a contract that residents have not entered into?
This is actually this has been brought up previously, and the local government, we operate under the state government's local government.
Constitution's higher than state government. Constitution
I
is
will
the
let
highest
our
law.
governance young lady.
So every state has its own constitution. So we have
But federal constitution is over as above.
Would you let the young lady answer?
Sorry.
So we have the Constitution Act of 1889, and in 1979 we actually fought the state government to put the provision to codify beyond doubt the people within the confines of the district of Western Australia, or the land, the territory of Western Australia, that we have under section 52 of that act, recognition of local government. As a result, we have a local government act that comes from that constitution, set by Parliament of the Western Australian Parliament, which then turns around and says there's acts that can be made. One of them is the Local Government Act, and the Local Government Act has under Part 6 the ability to put rates and service charges against property, which is legally recognised. With regards to the referendum and the Constitution of Australia, which was done with those particular aspects of it, historically, if you read the documents that came from it, it was run on the campaign for no about centralisation of government. So people were concerned that if the federal government was in there, it would be.
The discussions are irrelevant. The public
But-
said no, we don't want the
Uh,
Constitution to recognise local government.
Okay.
It's fact that, or I could even on a constitutional law basis, the fact that you have the Constitution of Australia, there is also within that Constitution the recognition of state government, and in
which is
One of them being-
overshadowed by
Stephanie?
the national
One of
constitution.
them being that you can actually do things such as create local government and codify local government. So
I-
that is the sharing of powers between Commonwealth and state. So there is no argument about the recognition of local government and the ability for local government. There's actually, if you
Depending who you ask.
from a point of view from constitutional law, but there is, I suppose, argument whether or not federal government under the constitution can then do things like direct local government, which they cannot do under the constitution. So therefore, they have to provide grants. Federal government does grants to local government to do things, and they do it to state government agencies, and they bypass money through that. Federal government recognises the ability for state government and for local government to do things under state constitution.
So I'm going to interrupt here. People come into the chamber to ask questions, and I would state that you have an obligation coming into the chamber and asking questions to listen to the answers without interruption. We also have a process here where I'm fairly generous. People are allowed to ask up to 2 questions, and I usually ask if other people have questions. Now, we don't have many people in the chamber tonight, but I will ask you to sit down while I ask if other people have questions. So, okay, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, are there others who would like to ask questions? Mr. Busby?
Bill Busby, 53 Hague Street, Ashfield. Ashfield Reserve is a tinder thing at the moment. I don't know where we're at with the irrigation and all the board stuff, like a maintenance, and it's going to cost you a few bob to fix that. Where are we at with that? Because we've got people that smoke in the public toilets area, hang around, sit on the grass, smoke on the grass. We've got a vehicle that drives on the grass.
Okay,
That's
so-
recreation. Is there a risk of a fire? We're big on work health and safety here.
So, Mr.
That is
Busby,
a
let me
massive
ask
risk.
the officer for an answer to that. It's an unfortunate time of year for the board to actually
Wasn't planned on that.
fail, so it is an unfortunate time of year. So, Mr. Adams.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Yes, Bill, as you note, the bore has failed. We have been working on a solution, both long-term and short-term solutions. We believe that we've got a short-term solution which we just finalising to implement, and it is hoped that the solution will be in place in January.
What I'm asking, if I'm allowed to, is with the safety aspect. I don't know how many people smoke that come off the train and go to the school. If they drop a cigarette butt, what's the mitigation to prevent a fire and raising the whole lot? It looks like some of the trees might even be dying in the area, I'm not sure. But it's 10 weeks, I'm guessing, since the bore failed. And if it's another 10 weeks, the risk of a fire, where are we at with that? Because it could be catastrophic. That's all I'm asking. There's nothing there. The fire brigade's not part there. There's nobody's checked. The people that smoke in the area, I've spoken to them and asked them to stay on the concrete.
So, Mr. Busby, I was down
Just
at
as
the
a risk of
reserve. I was
fire, I'm
down
just
at, I was
curious.
down. I was down at the reserve last week. It's all very short grass at the moment, is it not? It's very short.
I wouldn't call it grass at the moment. There's no grass.
Okay, sand.
That's close to.
Okay, so if it's cigarette butts going into sand, you're hardly likely to get a wildfire effect.
If you walk across the crispy surface, and if people throw cigarette butts out in street fires that caused in the mulch and the bits and pieces. I just see a possibility of a risk. I'm just making you aware of it. I don't know the answer to it. If it was something minor, I could run a hose across the road or run a hose from the club or do something. But there is nothing at the moment stopping accidental or a firebug. So it's just to make you aware of it. And I know that kind of doing something with the bore, but after 10 weeks, I don't know where we're at with it.
Thank you, Mrs. Busby. Questions? Yes, Ms. Brinkworth.
And Nicholas, 99 Street, Bassendean. I went through those nearly 400 pages. Very good. It's taken me all weekend. But I always like to go to the checks of the page. That's my interest. I noticed that about $30,000 has been spent on weed control. Well, I don't know where the hell you've done it, honestly. Guildford Road is an absolute disgrace. and so does Collier Road.
So can I answer that question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so Guildford Road is under the management of Main Roads. I believe that the officer, Miss Davey, has actually written to Main Roads and requested a schedule of when they're doing the treatments for Guildford Road. So, and I have noticed the weeds on Guildford Road, so you're not the only one who's noticed that. And in fact, I wrote to Miss Davey some weeks ago about that. So our officers are chasing that up, and it is unfortunate that the main road, which is the main entry into our town, seems to not get the attention from Main Roads that it deserves. In respect to the other streets in the town, I believe that they're halfway through the weeding program at the moment. Ms. Davies, if you can correct me.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So there is a program happening at the moment which should be finished shortly.
The majority will be finished by Friday.
Thank you. The other question is, I keep seeing trees, seedlings. I know we love trees, but if you came to my place at the moment, it takes hours to rake up the leaves. It's costing me $100 a week to get someone just to do them. So please, when you plant trees, make sure they're not these terrible ones with leaves going everywhere. And with that, there was $9,000 allocated for the people power trees down there. Where are they going now?
I'll have to ask the officer on that.
I'd have to take that question on notice. We are stockpiling those trees, taking them back to the yard, and there's no planned destination for them as yet. They'll be placed in the ground in in specific locations around the town.
Sorry, there was no plan. No plan.
The plan is to take them back through you, Madam Mayor, the plan is to take them back to the yard and store them at the yard in bigger pots and then relocate them after that. It's not a good time to plant them at this time of year.
So, Ms. Brinkworth, I believe that they are getting well watered at the depot.
I hope so.
No, they're getting well watered at the depot, but the best planting time out into the public areas is winter. So there have on occasions been trees stockpiled at the depot that are watered throughout the time that they're at the depot, and then they're scheduled into the planting regime that happens in winter, which usually starts around about late April, beginning of May is the start of the planting program.
But I would like to know where they're going. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Ms. Hammersley, did you want to add one more question, or you're finished with your questions?
It was more of a discussion.
Okay.
My point was that the federal constitution overrides state constitution.
I think we've done that one completely now. Question time is specifically for questions which then elicit an answer either from myself or the administration. If you'd come to the microphone, ma'am, for the recording.
The website is not very clear about how residents propose information. It says that you can give a deputation. There's no explanation as to what a deputation is. And the only online system of liaising with the town is to provide up to 3 questions. That's the process I've followed because that's the only processes available to me on the website. So maybe there needs to be a bit of clarification about how residents come to the town with their issues of concern. So what is a deputation? If you're giving a deputation, this is what it should look like. This is where you email it to, whatever. But in my position, I had no option but to phrase my discussion in terms of up to 3 questions because that's all that's available. So maybe the website could do a review.
Thank you. I will say that councillors and myself are always happy for a resident to ring us. I think we've had discussions online as well. So you can always pick up the phone. Our phone numbers are on the website.
If you want it formal, you want it in the formal
But if you wanted
context.
information about deputations and those sort of things, you may always pick up the phone and ask. we'll take that on board and ascertain if there's ways to actually convey that information. Now, there was one other question from Andrea Harworth Booth, which was, has the council explored the legality of charging residents for a service that has already been paid for and installed, i.e. underground power? Yes, council may impose a service charge in accordance with section 6.32 of the Local Government Act 1995. So I believe that's the last of the questions, so I'll close question time now. And there are no petitions that have been presented. So councillors will now move on to confirmation of the minutes, 9.1. That the minutes of the special council meeting held on the 29th of November 2022 be received and confirmed as a true record. Do I have a mover? Councillor Carter, seconded. Councillor Wilding. Anyone against? I declare that carried. You're still with us, Councillor Polifka?
Absolutely. I thought I would only...
No, that's fine. I was just checking. 9.2, that the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on the 29th of November 2022 be received and be confirmed as a true record. Mover, Councillor McLennan, seconded, Councillor Ames. Anyone against? I'll declare that carried. There is no business deferred from a previous meeting. External committee reports and updates. 11.1, that council notes that no documents from external committees have been received within the reporting period. A mover, Councillor Wilding, seconded, Councillor Ames. Anyone against? I'll declare that carried. So councillors, we now move to items en bloc. So coming out of en bloc, I have 12.3, 12.5, 12.11, 12.13. I also have already out of en bloc 12.6, 12.7, 12.8, 12.10, 12.12 and 12.14. Are there any other items that you would like to pull out of en bloc? Councillor Ames, you have your hand half up.
Correct, if you give me just a couple of seconds, Madam Mayor.
Would you like me to repeat the ones I've got coming out of en bloc?
No, I'd like to take item 12.2 as en bloc, please.
12.2. Okay. Okay. So, councillors, I'm going to repeat what's coming out of en bloc. 12.2, 12.3, 12.5, 12.9, 12.11 and 12.13, which leaves 12.4, 12.15, 12.16, 12.17 and 12.18 remaining en bloc. Can I have a mover for those items? Councillor McWilliams, seconded. Councillor Wilding. Anyone against? I'll declare those carried. So, councillors, okay. So, councillors, the first item would be 12.2, which is the proposed demolition of 168 Lot 329 West Road and 145 Lot 308 Whitfield Street. And I will ask the officer to talk to this one. Ms. Shaw.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The town has no further additional information to provide other than to note that our planning services would be more than happy to liaise with the estate in terms of future potential subdivision orientation and layout.
Okay. Councillors, do we have any further questions on this one? Councillor Ames.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you, and this will likely go to the Department of Planning. After listening to the application this afternoon or this evening, it just brought to, I suppose, a little bit more of my front of mind in regards to, I suppose, what the property gives value-wise to our community. Obviously, we had a bit of a chat, we had a very in-depth chat last week in our briefing session. I've gone through and looked at in detail the architect's assessment, the heritage assessment, and we've obviously heard from the member of the public this afternoon regarding the beneficiaries of what can be quite a important decision, not for the community but also for the beneficiaries of the estate. So I suppose my question to the Department of Planning is there any way in which, based on some further assessment of the property, that if it is such in condition that it's going to cost a multitude of dollars that doesn't really gain much for the actual property owners themselves, is there an opportunity that we can look at the heritage listing of this property, remove it, and then obviously go through the wishes of the will to have it demolished, and obviously the beneficiaries have it as it is, as discussed with the will. I know that's might be a bit of a roundabout sort of way to say, is the officer's recommendation going to be set in stone?
I will just, before the officer's recommendations are as presented in the agendas, and if there is any alternative or amendments at this stage of the game in an OCM, that comes from us as councillors rather than the officers. The officers generally do not change their recommendations. All they can do is provide you with the information about different courses of action and what the results would be. So I will throw to Ms. Shaw now.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So a place being included on the heritage list is simply the trigger for us to require a development application in which we can then consider it against the local heritage framework. So in respect to this property, on page 15 of the agenda, it outlines the reasons why this place was considered to have heritage significance for inclusion in the register. And that effectively relates to the property itself being an example of a Federation-style bungalow, its historical association with the area, and as a social landmark to the district. So it is open for council to instead replace the officer recommendation and resolve to not only remove the property from the heritage list, that would occur as a separate process after council resolves to instead demolish the property. So the listing itself doesn't prevent council from making the decision to demolish the property tonight. If council resolves to demolish the property, it would then be removed from the heritage list.
Not the other way around.
It is, sorry, through you, Madam Mayor, it is open for council to review any place as part of its review of the heritage list as those reviews are undertaken. There's no requirement for us to wait until the next formal review of the heritage list. We can consider individual nominations at any point in time. We would be considering whether or not the place has significantly changed from the reasons that were otherwise outlined in the heritage list as to why it was listed in the first instance. So, for example, the heritage condition of the house, as evidenced in the structural report, is considered to be sufficient such that the house wouldn't otherwise require extensive restoration works at this point in time. But, for example, the heritage rose gardens may not be to the same state that they were otherwise maintained in, which would then warrant the listing. So if council was to review the heritage listing itself, it could resolve to either remove it from the heritage list in its entirety, or it could change the management category to reflect the significance of the place in its current state. So at the moment, the place is a Category 2 listing, and all Category 1s and 2 listings are included on the town's heritage list, but council could instead resolve to change it to a Category 3 or 4 listing, thereby removing it from the heritage list and only including the place in the local heritage survey, which would not otherwise trigger the need for a development application to demolish the place.
Councillor Plivka has a question.
Yes. Through you, Madam Mayor, to the planning Yeah, excellent. The homestead itself, that was originally situated on, as I understand it, 6 1,000 square metre lots.
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, that's correct. The original landholding was made up of larger portions, which have since been subdivided into approximately 1,012 square metre R20 quoted lots, some of which have been sold, including number 170 West Road, which I believe settled on the 5th of December.
I understand that was the current zoning, but I'm led to believe that at some time in the past, the homestead was situated on what amounted to a 6,000 square metre lot.
I understand that is correct, yes.
And in terms of the homestead itself, what its original, well, it's the front door, what direction does that face?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it faces east onto West Road.
The front door? Or?
Yes. Oh, sorry, the front door itself faces south. The dwelling itself is orientated to the east towards West Road.
Yeah, so the property is sort of now, I guess, hemmed in by developments which previous councils have permitted to occur.
So the surrounding development to the existing homestead has previously been subdivided by the West Australian Planning Commission, yes, and then since developed by the towns or landowners at the town.
Yes, so at some point the statutory authority has said to the landowner, you can carve off a portion of this large lot, rezone it, whatever you want to call it. But at some point the statutory authority has allowed the buffer zone around this property to decrease to its current uninspiring extent.
Yes.
Just in terms of the rose garden, I also understand that, clarify that, is that there was a significant rose garden which was situated on the riverside of West Road. I think Councillor William may have alluded to that. Is that the case that the more historic rose garden was located on the opposite side of West Road?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm unsure of what was situated on the eastern side of West Road in the past, but for the purposes of this heritage listing, it only pertains to the rose garden on the property at the front of number 168 West Road.
Right, and in terms of so the Hams family has been involved in that associated Bassendean for some time, is it the case that there was also a much grander Hams house which was in part constructed from the bricks of the original Bassendean homestead?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I would need to take that question on notice, but I don't believe that is the case.
Sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Taken on notice, Ms. Shaw doesn't believe that is the case, but she will take the question on notice.
Okay. And I suppose finally, has the town had any discussions with the owner of the property concerning the potential relocation of that property towards, so within the existing lot, but towards West Road, which may well, I suppose, cause the rose garden to have to be removed, but which could potentially allow the property to be retained for a dwelling to be built behind that property, so as to permit the landowner to develop that lot to its current R20 potential. So as I understand it, there is a prohibition on a dwelling being constructed in front of the heritage property because that would obscure its visibility from the street and the interaction.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, that is the case. We have had some discussions with the estate in that respect, but because part of the rationale for the heritage listing did include the rose gardens at the front of the property and the views of significance from West Road, we would advise against moving the property forward and instead consider concessions to the minimum and average land area requirements otherwise required by the residential design codes in terms of a lot situated at the rear of the property. In our minds, that would enable the retention of the views to the place from West Road while still providing subdivision potential to the rear of the property. There's a number of outbuildings on the property on Whitfield Street, which the town would be agreeable to for demolition and removal because they don't contribute significantly to the heritage listing itself.
The asbestos garage.
The laundry outhouse and there's an outbuilding shed. Yes. Yep. So, Councillor Plivko, Ms Shaw has indicated that those outbuildings, I believe they're at the rear of the property, the administration have indicated that they are not adverse to those ones being removed. So, but they are at the rear of the property.
Yes, situated on the rear.
So Councillor Plivko.
My final question is, we're trying to maintain the interaction of this heritage property with visibility from the street. What is to stop the landowner or some future owner from growing a large hedge which would eliminate such interaction?
Through you, Madam Mayor, there would be no statutory controls in that respect, and so a landowner could plant a hedge at the front of the property.
Okay, thank you.
So following on from those questions, if you don't mind, Ms Shaw, I'd just like to ask a question. The statutory authority that may have allowed the 6 lots to be created, would they have any awareness of the Category 2 heritage listing, or would that listing have existed when they originally created those 6 lots? I'm just trying to actually ascertain if there was any interaction between the heritage listing Category 2 and the statutory authority creating those 6 lots.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the Department of Heritage is provided copies of subdivision applications to provide comment on prior to the West Australian Planning Commission making a decision on the subdivision application. So at some point in time, it's likely that it would have been referred to the Department of Heritage. Any Category 1 or 2 listings that make up the town's heritage list are provided to the Department of Heritage as part of its review of the heritage list. But it really depends on the timing of when the lot was actually created. I can go back and have a look through some aerial photography, but I would say that it predates the current scheme.
Okay, that's what I thought. Councillors, other councillors with questions? Okay, so
Madam Mayor, to see if I could get maybe some wording through the Department of Planning in regards to an amendment for this particular officer recommendation.
Yes, well, I mean, you can create your own amendment, but I also understand that there is going to be a mover for the officer's recommendation as well. So I'm fairly comfortable in allowing this to go to a vote on the officer's recommendation. If that fails, we could go to an amendment. You could debate that if you like, or would you? Sorry, Councillor McLennan.
It's difficult for councillors to vote on the officer recommendation knowing there's a proposed amendment without knowing what the amendment might be.
Yes, okay. So you want a few minutes to compose an amendment?
I'd like to see if the wording that I've provided here can be that amendment. The council seeks to change the heritage status of 168 West Road to a Category 3 listing and continues to liaise with the landowners to seek approval for the DA based on the landowner's request for demolition of the house and gardens.
Okay. So
Sorry.
An alternate motion it is now. So would you like to move that?
If that is wording, that would be sufficient to seek to change the heritage status of this particular listing.
I'm going to ask Councillor, sorry, Ms Shaw. I keep calling you Councillor. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a point of clarification. If the intent is to provide for the demolition of the property, I would suggest that the wording would simply be that council approves the application, etc. If the intent is to change the listing of the property, there are requirements under the regulations in terms of advertising for changes to the local heritage survey and the heritage list that we have to follow before we can change the listing. So whilst it's open to council to demolish the property now, which would then trigger the ability for us to advertise the proposal to amend the list reflective of the demolition, we can do that as a separate administrative process, but we wouldn't be able to move a recommendation to simply change the heritage list now without going through those statutory processes. So, Councillor Wilding?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a quick question to clarify on that. If it was changed to a category 3, would it require the development approval and then demolish?
Through you, Madam Mayor, no, it would be exempt from requiring demolition if it was then also removed from the heritage list itself. So whilst category 1s and 2s are included on the town's heritage list, there's nothing that actually stops a category 3 property being retained on the heritage list. So we would need to go through the formal process of removing it from the heritage list despite being a category 3. So Mr Gibson would like to actually make a comment here.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The decision before council tonight is on the application for development approval. It is quite binary. Council can approve it or refuse it. I understand how the discussion has taken us into the heritage list and the local heritage survey, but that is not necessarily the amendments to those or review of those documents is not necessarily consideration for council at this very point. The decision for council this evening is the application lodged by the applicant and how council is going to determine that either positive or negative. If council resolves to approve the application for development approval and thereby permitting the removal / demolition of the dwelling, as Ms Shaw has rightly pointed out, a process would if the applicant then acted on that approval, remove the dwelling from the land, and therefore it was deemed that the site offered little to no heritage value. Staff, as an administrative next step, will start the process of reviewing its heritage list and local heritage survey. So the decision before council tonight is fundamentally whether to approve or not the application for development approval.
Can I just ask one question of Ms Shaw? If the officer's recommendation is supported tonight, the applicant still has other avenues of appeal against that decision. Is that correct?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, the applicant has a right of review to the State Administrative Tribunal. What typically occurs through that process is a series of mediation where we would liaise with the landowner to potentially come up with an alternative solution that would then come back before council under a Section 31 reconsideration under the State Administrative Tribunal Act for council to reconsider its previous decision. If as a result of those processes the outcome is still unfavourable to the applicant, they can proceed through the State Administrative Tribunal to a full hearing where the SAT will make a determination on the application.
And if I'm hearing all the information correctly from last week and this week, I believe that the administration planning staff are quite happy to work with the applicant about creating subdivision potential to the rear of the block. Is that correct?
Thank you. There is already subdivision potential of the site. It's just in terms of the configuration of the future lot layout. Okay. So the town would not support the creation of an additional lot to the front of the property facing West Road because that would obscure views to the heritage place, but it would support the creation of a lot to the rear of the property.
Okay. So Councillor Polifka, can we just make it a couple of questions and then we'll...
I understand. If somebody intended to move what this recommendation as is, I understand what the CEO has said, that it's yes or no. If it is no, are we able to add, I suppose picking up on the point that the planning made, are we able to resolve, for example, that it can't be demolished? We might say that we would permit the building to be relocated anywhere within the existing lot.
So Ms Shaw,
The town's preference would be that council did not make that recommendation on the basis that we haven't been provided with information in support of such an application to enable us to assess that.
So, Councillor Polifka,
Well, I heard that, I can accept that. So what I'm hearing is that it's incumbent on the owner, should he wish to explore that avenue, to meet with the administration, that that's not something which is necessarily ruled out, it's not something which could be agreed upon this evening.
So,
is that accurate?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, as previously advised, the town staff are more than happy to meet with the owners of the property to discuss future subdivision layouts.
So, councillors, we have an officer's recommendation in front of us. We have canvassed potential amendments, which, listening to the officer's advice, seems to have some difficulties. So, councillors, if we don't have further questions, if we don't have a definitive alternative to the officer's recommendation, I would like to ask if we've got a mover for the officer's recommendation. Councillor Carter? Seconder? Councillor McLennan? Do we have anyone against? Councillor Ames? So we'll go to debate. So Councillor Carter. Sorry. Okay. Paul, I know that you've got your hand up as well. So we'll go to debate and I'll come to you throughout the debate if you don't mind. So Councillor Carter, if you'd like to open debate.
I don't think I've anything to add to what has already been widely discussed tonight. It's a heritage property and I think we've got a very well thought out motion recommendation from the staff, which I support.
Councillor McLennan? Councillor Ames?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you, we've obviously got some information from our officers, which, from my perspective, is valid to an extent. We've got a property down on West Road that is continuing to deteriorate. Then we've got two aspects here regarding the actual property itself. We've got the rose gardens at the front. We've obviously done our drive-bys, being diligent councillors, and found that the rose gardens, as described by our member of the community, to not be in a state where we're actually going to have, future heritage facade. We've also heard that we can do anything in front of these heritage buildings that will then not allow us to view the actual heritage prevalence itself. We've got a deteriorating house, even though we've got some heritage assessments there to say that it is in fair condition. How long that fair condition remains is questionable. We know that there's going to be quite a lot of money, time, effort to be able to rebuild this particular heritage space, and we've got a lot of people within the community that could be of of great benefit to themselves, that could also continue to develop this area for the greater of the community moving forward as well. So even though we are looking at a property here that is on our heritage listings, we do have the opportunity to be able to change our thinking in regards to that. And if we are talking about development within our town, sensible development within our town, I think this could be a great opportunity with many benefits for not only the community but also the beneficiaries of the landowner and the will of the individual that was under the property and the house. So I did thank you for your time, and if any other people would like to speak with me, then I'll support their comment as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors for who would like to speak? I'll speak for. Oh, Councillor McLennan. I'll speak for the officer's recommendation. Couple of points. The state government mandates that local governments create heritage lists, and there's a reason for that. It's because we have disappearing heritage properties around the entire state. Yes, it is expensive to maintain heritage properties, But we're not judging this property on its deteriorating state into the future. We're judging this property on the here and now. So the officer's report is clear that the property at this point in time is in reasonable condition and could be restored. Whether it's restored by the current owners or whether it's restored by a new owner is not our decision. That's not what's before us. It could be, if the property was put on the market as is, that there is a potential owner out there. There are people who love heritage places. There are people who spend their lives restoring heritage places. We've heard from the officers that there is an ability to provide subdivision at the rear of the property and to perhaps negotiate increased density in that subdivision. However, that's not for us as councillors. That comes back to the officers and the property owners. That is up to them to negotiate and to figure out how those configurations might work. I do get worried when we have properties that have been listed for some considerable number of years on the heritage list and then talk about removing them. I become concerned about that because we actually don't have that many properties in this town on the list 1 and 2. We don't have that many. We have a lot on the list 3 and they have less protections. So I would encourage councillors to consider wisely the future of heritage properties in this town. One of the highly rated things from our community in both the Bassendean community survey, which had over 3,000 interactions from our community, plus in the recent Catalyst survey, is how our community values heritage and how they value the town and the feel of the town. So if we start destroying the fabric of the town, then we have to question about whether we're doing our community a service. So this property, it is obviously a deceased estate, and I do have some sympathy for the gentleman who's executor and trying to work his way through this process. But I would ask for that person to liaise with our staff to see how you may progress this without demolishing the property. I would really urge that sort of dialogue to happen. So, councillors, I will now ask if there's anyone else. I think Councillor Plivka, would you like to speak against the officer recommendation?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
The tragedy of this property for me is that the heritage was destroyed some time ago. Heritage isn't just about the age of something. Okay, it's from 1915, it's old, I understand. It's about the context as well. I mean, this was a homestead that was situated in the middle of a large landfill. That's been destroyed. When it was permitted for individual lots to be created on the sort of better description, Guildford Road side of that lot, you had houses, parapet walls built within what to be 5 or 6 metres of that house. I mean, any original context had been destroyed. So we were sort of at the tail end of trying to preserve heritage. It seems to me, to a certain extent, that the horse has already bolted. I would look for alternate solutions which allow this house timber building to be retained, but which put less of an imposition on not only the landowner themselves, but on the surrounding landowner. I do get a little bit concerned when we start talking about, well, we might be getting a density bonus somewhere else. You're the neighbours that are next to this density bonus, next to this spot rezoning, if you will. I mean, I'm not too comfortable if I'm that neighbour. So we don't want to sort of be trying to solve one problem by creating other problems. In terms of the dwelling itself, it's in very good condition on the outside, original timber boards. Inside, it's in good condition. It's in good condition for a reason. It's entirely asbestos. I mean, we don't expect people to live in an asbestos building. My understanding is that when you have old asbestos boards attached to a jar of frame, that you have quite a few expenses. The first is the safe removal of the asbestos, but then it's not just as simple as wax and plasterboard in and attach it to the fasten it out, the jarrah frame with a soft wood such as pine, before you can then attach the plasterboard to the wall. So it is quite an extensive renovation. I don't doubt that somebody may well wish to undertake that renovation. My concern is that do we strike the right balance? For me, the right balance
So,
is...
Councillor Plifka, I'm going to ask you to wind up.
The right balance would be preferably relocation, and if that effectively demolition is all that's being offered otherwise, then I would have to support demolition, but my preference is relocation, and I hope that is something which the parties can arrive at, and that can come back to the council.
Thank you, Councillor Plifka. Councillor Plifka, you did have your hand up, but I'm just...
I'll just use my point of order, and I was going to request that you would mind timing this debate so we all get the same amount of time, please.
Thank you. Councillor speaking for the officer recommendation. Councillor McLennan, you had your hand up previously.
I don't feel need to.
Councillor McLennan.
Just to set the record straight, thank you, Councillor Plifka, for acknowledging my earlier comments about the property having lived in Bassendean since 1963, pretty much most of my life. I am aware of this property being owned by two sisters who lived there together. I understand that father were married. They did have an extensive rose garden. It was a delight to all passers-by, and we all knew where it was. It was also, just correcting what Councillor Philip was saying, was that to the Perth side of the property, there was a commercial rose garden, people selling roses. From there, the Teal family, I think it was Thiele, lived there. That area has been developed now. You see there's some double-story places there, and that rose garden disappeared, probably because of the 60s floods, when the flood mark was something like, 15 or 16 foot above the road. So it was wet. It was very, very wet. Obviously, roses don't like getting too wet, so they disappeared. But the thing is that I think that there is an opportunity also, just to acknowledge Councillor Finker's sort of concept of looking at the situation laterally, is that there have been situations where entire jetties have been removed and members of the public have come and taken bits away because they want to cherish this heritage structure. And so that's happened in Esperance and various other places. I think it happened at Hamlin Bay as well. The point is that there are ways of achieving some sort of conservation of heritage, whether people taking bits home and making bookcases out of them, or
so
taking to presumably dead roses and giving them new life. That's what I have to say.
Councillors. Okay. Any more councillors for or against? We'll go to closing. Councillor Carter.
No, nothing more to say.
So, councillors, I'm going to put that to the vote. All those in favour of the officer's recommendation? Councillor Hamilton, McWilliam, McLennan, Carter, Wilding. Those against? Councillor Plifka and Councillor Ames. You've got that? Amy? Yes. Thank you. Okay, thank you, councillors. 12.3, the Community Transport Service. Do you want to speak to this, or you?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Only to note that following from the briefing session, councillors were provided copies of the relevant applicable legislation, associated staff costs, and details with respect to whether external volunteers would be considered to be a person conducting a business or undertaking.
Thank you. So, councillors, you're aware that I circulated an alternative. And there has been, so Councillor McLennan, you'd like to ask questions?
Yeah.
Yep.
So no, I'm aware that you've circulated the alternative, thank you, but I just haven't had an opportunity to hear from the officers about their thoughts on your alternative.
Certainly. Would you like to?
Through Madam Mayor, the draft alternative is acknowledged, and I think we are correctly interpreting the intent that underpins it. It is, in its current wording, we believe, potentially problematic, in that it doesn't necessarily fully divest the town of the function, and therefore does not divest the town of the risk and liability. Councillors would have seen a further draft amended set of words that was sent after 1 o'clock this afternoon.
So can I just clarify, is that the one we've got before us with the purple additions?
Through Madam Mayor, no.
Not all of it,
No. What councillors were provided from myself at 1:06 p.m. Was a simple 2-point recommendation that I believe speaks to the intent of Madam Mayor's draft amended recommendation, and simply notes that the town service would be discontinued on the 23rd of December, but subsequently requests the CEO to engage with the committee of 55 plus volunteers to investigate the potential for that organisation to establish a community transport service, which may involve the town providing support by way of provision of vehicles, direct funding and or office space.
So can I ask a question on that? I understood the need to put a full stop behind the service that's currently run by the town. So I actually thought in that first stop point, inserting discontinues instead of the temporary that I originally had, that would do that.
Through Madam Mayor, your further amended part 1 broadly aligns with the staff recommendation.
Okay.
So no issue with part 1.
Point 1 is fine. Point 2 has goes into more detail than what you had in your suggestion. Is there a problem with that extra detail? Because it still requires you to liaise with the 55 group.
Through Madam Mayor, not necessarily. I suppose the purpose of staff's draft amended wording was to not get too specific, because in terms of one of the points you've raised there, Madam Mayor, saying that both vehicles are currently leased, that is not correct. One of the vehicles is owned and one of the vehicles is leased. We've recently sought advice from the leasing company, which advised that we would not be able to sublease that vehicle. So we would simply need to return that to the lease company. The same does not go for the vehicle that is owned by the town outright. That is an asset owned by the town and can be dealt with by the town accordingly. So for those sort of reasons, we didn't want to get too detailed in the resolution of council, apart from honouring the clear intent from you, Madam Mayor, to have further discussions with the group to see if the group was able to commence a community transport service separate from and detached from the town.
Okay, so just...
And if I
sorry.
If I can, Madam Mayor, the allocation of funds would seem premature in the absence of a broader discussion about the budget, core business plan, long-term financial plan. So I would recommend that council not necessarily make that decision now, and that potentially be part of that further discussion with the 55 plus group. It may well be, speaking to Councillor Ames's point earlier this evening, that once those, if indeed council resolves, once those discussions occur with the group, it may be that there is not the same appetite for that group to run this service. Certainly the thread and the theme that runs throughout the officer report is about risk and liability, and that is something that the 55 plus group or any other group for that matter would need to appropriately consider before embarking upon a service like this. So
can I, sorry, Councillor McLennan, can I just ask the rationale, the attachment that came through during the week, say that if the town was only providing equipment and the like to an external volunteer organisation and the town was to otherwise have no other involvement, the town would not be a PCBU. In this instance, the town would only be responsible for ensuring the external provider knew how to safely operate the equipment as part of the handover of that equipment. Now, I understood from the financial information provided in the report last week that both vehicles were leased. Would you envisage that the 55 plus group don't receive any vehicle assistance from the town at all? How would you?
Through Madam Mayor, not making any assumptions at all. I think that speaks to the recommended approach of having those discussions with the group before any firm commitments are made.
Councillor McLennan.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to clarify, because what you just read out then referred to if we were to have no involvement other than provision of equipment. But tonight I've heard equipment, insurance, and office, funding. At what point does it cross the line from it being an independent volunteer organisation and the town actually?
Through Madam Mayor, a very good question, and I suppose that is that issue of concern about the tipping point of where we can no longer say we're not the PCBU, particularly if council, as part of draft part 5, is actually putting an obligation on the group as if we have an arrangement. So that particular aspect, amongst those mentioned by yourself, Councillor McLennan, does give rise to some concern, and that's why it starts with the third approach, to have those discussions, depending on the appetite of the group as to what they're willing to do. The town could seek its own advice, and we would probably suggest the group do the same. And then if there was sufficient agreement, arrangements would be struck if both parties were comfortable, but those discussions certainly need to occur first.
Okay. Any other questions first before I ask some further questions? Councillor Plivka? No? Okay. I do have some interest in the PCBU. My understanding of reading that legislation that related to volunteer-run organisations, that you cease to be a PCBU, which the town is at the moment, only if you're only in that position if town have employed staff running the service. It didn't seem to extend to vehicles and equipment and the telephones and things like that. So I'm just seeking some clarity there, because it did seem to be a little bit of a sticking point that to be classified as a PCBU, you had to have employed staff.
Through Madam Mayor, if we are asking people to complete an undertaking, whether that's paid or volunteer, we would be a PCBU. What is being contemplated in the alternative is for the cessation of the town service and a community group completely separate to the town, save for any assistance and support as opposed to direction and requirement. The service would be run by a community group. But certainly, if we are requiring certain things to happen, or we are directing certain things to occur, the view is that we would be a PCBU. If a community group was undertaking their own activities, with or without the town's arm's length assistance, the view is that we would not be the PCBU.
Okay, Councillor Plivka?
Yes, thank you. Just following on from that question, if the town were to essentially provide all equipment, facilities, buildings, whatever was required, save for people, and that was effectively done under a hire type arrangement, whether we receive any money from it or not was either here or there, but if we were able to simply provide all of those things, would we then not be the PCBU, where we would be providing everything safe for people. And so we have no way of controlling, directing, or otherwise affecting the outcome.
Through your Madam Mayor, broadly, that's the advice we've received. It needs to be noted that if the town was providing assistance to a group, but not at all controlling or requiring or directing, the town would therefore have no resultant control over the outcome. So whilst the town could provide vehicles and office space and money and payments and whatever other assistance it was appropriate, it would have no control over the outcome, and that would be one of the risks the council and the town would have to consider at that point. We're not looking for council to make those decisions this evening because that requires in-depth conversations with the relevant community group, and it probably requires further advice being sought from the town's insurers as to whether there is a tipping point that if you provide excessive or you provide enough assistance, it is tantamount to being the PCBU. In addition to that, I'd say, sorry, Councillor. In addition to that, I'd say we haven't probably had enough discussions with the community group itself to properly ascertain its appetite to run this service, knowing the risk that we have identified, whether the group is willing to take that risk on.
Okay, so can any resolution of council could potentially be framed to be subject to those appropriate requirements to satisfy our insurer?
Through Madam Mayor, that could potentially be a means forward.
Okay, thank you.
So before we proceed with more questions, councillors, I will just read out the alternative wording that was put through by Mr Gibson earlier today, that Council 1 notes that the town's community transport service will be discontinued on the 23rd of December 2022. 2, request the CEO to engage with the committee of the 55 plus volunteers to investigate the potential for that organisation to establish a community transport service, which may involve the town providing support by way of the provision of vehicles. I would like to cut out direct funding, vehicles and assistance and or office space. Now, the reason I'd like to cut out direct funding is because clearly the town I'll leave it in there. I'll leave it in there. So I am willing to change my alternative to the wording provided by Mr Gibson, but just letting people know. So Councillor Ames, Councillor McLean.
I was just going to say I'm happy to second it so we can move forward.
Yep. Councillor Ames, do you want a question first before we move?
Very quickly, and maybe reverting to Councillor McLennan, if this might fly. Point 1, as it stands. Point 2, request the CEO to engage with the committee of the 55s plus volunteers group to investigate the potential for that organisation to establish a community transport service. Full stop.
Okay. Would we get a feedback on how these discussions, if I can ask a question of the officer, would we get feedback on how these discussions are progressing with the group?
Through Madam Mayor, I can certainly provide updates as they become available.
Okay. That's up to...
Yeah, I'm happy with that.
Okay. So we have a mover in Councillor McLennan, we have a seconder in Councillor Ames.
Like you were the mover.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay. Sorry. Mover and a seconder. Do we have anyone against? I'll declare that carried. Okay. Yes. Councillors, just to let you know, 12.5, I would like to move that to the end of the meeting because there's all confidential attachments and we go behind closed doors for that one. 12.6, decision of previous council resolution Bindaring Park Wetlands Plan. You wish to speak to that, Ms Davies, or you've spoken enough about it last week?
Thank you. Nothing further to add.
Okay, councillors, do we have any questions on this one? Councillor Carter?
Yes, I have a question. Thank you. Could I ask that can we be reassured that the rescission of the motion will not mean that the necessary improvements of the Bindaring Park is deferred again, possibly indefinitely? And second question, would it not be better for the Bindaring Park master plan to come after we've completed the Ashfield Flats master plan? Thank you.
Through Madam Mayor, quite possibly that will be a decision for council as part of the deliberations on the SCP Corporate Business Plan and the Long-Term Financial Plan. So very much open to council to order the projects.
So, any other questions, councillors? Do we have a mover for the officer's recommendation? Councillor McLennan, do we have a seconder? Councillor Ames. Do we have anyone against? Declare that carried. We'll move to 12.7, review of council policies on waste. Again, do we have any? No, the officer has said she's covered this topic completely last week. Do we have any questions on this item? No. So do we have a mover? Councillor McLennan, seconded. Councillor Ames. Anyone against? Declare that carried. 12.8, youth engagement project. Now I understand that Councillor Wilding has put up an amendment, in which case I will forego the very simple amendment that I put up earlier in the day in favour of Councillor Wilding's amendment. Let me just find it, Councillor Wilding, if you don't mind. So before we move on to this, would the officer like to speak to this item?
Nothing further to add, thank you.
Do you have any comments on the amendment that's been put forward by Councillor Wilding?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Only that the town will work with whatever provider is chosen by council in terms of delivering the youth engagement project.
So, any other questions, councillors? So do we have a mover, Councillor Wilding? Do we have a seconder, sorry? Councillor McWilliam. Do we have anyone against? Declare that carried. So 12.9, proposed targeted underground power program for Bassendean. Would you like to speak to this, or you covered it as well last week?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would, if you don't mind, briefly, just because there have been some changes to the report since the briefing session last week. So if I could just touch on that very briefly. The report's been updated since the briefing session to update the proposed timeframes on page 56, and that was as a result of an email I received from Western Power after the briefing session. Also to incorporate the statistics from the written survey responses into the analysis, which I'd just like to point out didn't result in any material change to that analysis, and to include the written survey responses as an attachment to the report with officer responses, and finally to include some survey responses that cover what we thought were the main themes that were evident from those responses into the body of the report with some officer comments in response to those as well. Thank you.
And apologies for getting the year wrong before earlier. So, councillors, questions? Councillor McLennan.
Just a query acknowledging the question that we had from the community member around council's decision making on this item. If council supports the MOU this evening, in my mind that was us committing to the project. And you mentioned the dates in 2024 when council make decisions about the costs to residents and the different configurations. Am I right in thinking that tonight we're actually committing to it, and those other decisions are really secondary to the commitment that we would make tonight or not?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think it's a very good point, and I think there is still a formal decision for council to make in terms of the co-funding agreement. The MOU is a fairly innocuous document that largely, I guess, permits information sharing and establishes the goodwill, but there is a clause in the MOU that says that council will work with Western Power to establish the project within the project area. And by entering into the MOU tonight, council is telling Western Power that it intends to work with Western Power on the project. And in response, Western Power will now, if council adopt the officer recommendation tonight, Western Power will then commit significant resources to the project in terms of going to detailed design. So I think the intent and the spirit of what council are being asked to do by entering into the MOU tonight is to provide that commitment to the project.
Can I follow on with a question on that? In that, to my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that committing to the MOU, there really isn't that much opportunity for community input after this point in time. Would you agree with that?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, I think so far, we have surveyed the community, they've been property owners, even though there wasn't a legal obligation to do so. And I think it's fair to say that there is pretty broad support for the project amongst property owners, judging from the responses that were received at the survey. Now, if council resolves to enter into the MOU, it does become a process that will grow some legs. There will be touch points with council, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of the co-funding agreement and ultimately the budget. We may also ask council to give an indication as to the likely service charges prior to the budget, like we did with the Eden Hill project, to give property owners and prospective purchasers of property some certainty. But largely, from this point, it will be council decisions. I wouldn't be proposing, certainly from the administration perspective, to go back to the community further aside from keeping them informed progress.
Councillor Politka has a question, obviously.
Yes, thank you. Just in terms of the memorandum of understanding, questions for you, Matt. The memorandum of understanding is necessary for us to get more detailed information as to how everything will occur and what will cost.
Through you, Madam Mayor, that's correct. Western Power will not proceed past this point without council entering into the memorandum of understanding. It's that commitment, I guess, that Western Power are looking for. And further to that, Western Power have advised that should council not enter into the memorandum of understanding in the very near future, there isn't a precise deadline for that, but it's looming, that Western Power would then look to other projects and continue on with its maintenance program in terms of replacing current infrastructure within the proposed project zone.
Yes, so once the memorandum of understanding has been entered into, though, it is still possible, although albeit probably ill-advised, council could remove themselves from that process at that point in time if they so decide.
Through Madam Mayor, my understanding is yes, that is legally possible. To do that until the may impact the town's capacity to attract people.
I have hands going up left, right, and centre here. Councillor Polifka, Councillor McLennan.
I'm just wanting to move the officer recommendation, please.
Yes, and I think Councillor Ames is wanting to second. So we've got some movement in the station. So I've got a mover and a seconder. Can I ask one question before we go to that? In respect to the one street that has the transmission lines, when will we have a little bit more certainty about the charging for those particular people? Because there's a significant number of questions coming from those people.
Yes, thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor. So there is a question, certainly there were some questions from the community, and I've attempted to provide a response in the very lengthy attachment. But essentially, I think all we can really say at the moment is that we're aware of the issue, and that when we do modelling on various options for the service charge the council to impose, I would certainly be proposing to include modelling that provides a discount from a standard charge to people resident on Irene Street. So at this point, the reason we can't be any more specific than that is because we only know what the total cost of the project is to an accuracy of plus or minus 30%. And we don't know at this point the complete makeup of the project area and what other potential impacts there may be. There may be high voltage transmission lines, there may be other areas within the project area that require different special dispensation. We need to determine the makeup and the configuration of the multi-unit development sites, and we need information from Western Power about what connections are required to the various properties. Because if we alter one variable, it affects another one. So they're all interrelated. So I think the only thing we can do there is once Western Power come back with an E10 estimate and we have some further information on all of those variables, we'll be able to present some models to council and some different options and work through that. And we'll have quite a bit of reasonable amount of time to actually be able to work through those different options with council.
Thank you. So we have a mover and a seconder. Councillors, do we have anyone against? I'll declare that carried. So councillors, we'll move on to 12.10, which is the RFT for provision of tree pruning services. Again, this was comprehensively covered last week, but I will ask if there are questions of the officer before we... And the officer, you have no additional comments, okay. So councillors, do we have any questions on this item? Do we have a mover? Councillor Ames, seconded. Councillor Wilding. Do we have anyone against? I'll declare that carried. Okay, so now 12.11, I pulled that out. Councillors, I was going to suggest that we defer this item for a workshop on the 7th of February, because in the bulletin we don't actually have a workshop on that date. And I would just ask the officer if there are any reservations with councillors having the second workshop on this item on that date.
Through Madam Mayor, we need to know what the workshop was. It's open to council to refer this to a workshop if that's the collective will. It needs to be acknowledged, however, if that's the approach, things will bank up behind it, particularly the corporate business plan and the rest of the integrated planning reporting framework. So whilst it is open to council, the council needs to be aware of the implications of such a decision.
Councillor McLennan.
Could I just ask a question of yourself? I understand that you're wanting more time for input, but another part of your email was around appointment of the new CEO in alignment with KPI design. Can you just help me understand what you're trying to achieve there?
The email that received, the advice received was that the KPIs and those are fairly strongly based on the strategic community plan. And I had not viewed the strategic community, myself personally, I had not viewed the strategic community plan through that lens. And there were suggested additions to the community strategic plan which were not incorporated into the document. And I know that there's been discussion from different councillors about different things that they wanted into that document. So given those various bits of feedback coming through, and given that the bulletin had the 7th of February as a date without a workshop, it occurred to me that there was potential to shift this to a workshop on the 7th of February. It is right at the beginning of our return to the work in the new year. So I'm not sure that it would bank up that much since it's at the beginning of the February return to work. Yes, Councillor Cannon.
Have you moved your motion? Because if not, I'll move the officer recommendation.
I'll move it. Seconded, Councillor Carter. Anyone against? Councillor McLennan. All those in favour, because it's a procedural to defer it. All those in favour? Councillor Carter, Ames, McWilliam, Wilding and Hamilton, so that's carried. Again, Councillor Polifka is for deferring as well, so that's Councillor McLennan against. Sorry, I didn't see you, Councillor Polifka. I've got the computer chain. I've just moved you around. Apologies. Okay. So 12.12 is the next item, the review of the delegations register. Again, I sent through some amendments. And if you would indulge me, councillors, I would just like you, because I haven't had a fulsome discussion with the officer about this, and I'd just like to ask a couple of questions before I move this. Some of the amendments I consider to be fairly innocuous, like provide timely advice rather than just provide advice to the councillors through the CEO bulletin. Do you have any objection to those two?
Madam Mayor, not particularly, but given that it's not all quantified, I'm clear on the value it adds, but otherwise, no.
The amendment that it's 1.2.12, I have recommended deletion of function 10. I'll read out function 10 for the councillors so that you're aware. So that relates to tenders. So in there, function 10 provides the CEO with the authority to vary a contract that has been entered into with a successful tenderer, provided the total variation value does not exceed 5% of the original contract. So I requested that be a deletion from the. Did you have a comment on that before I go to questions?
Okay, so through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I think I wasn't particularly prepared for this because I understood one of the proposals that we talked about in the previous session was to put this to a workshop to discuss the potential amendments to 1.2.12 more fully. I guess the aim of the delegation is to try and balance operational efficiency with what decisions that should rightly be made by council, and it's also the council's decision where that balance falls. Just note that if this delegation is removed, it means that any variation to any contract that the town has engaged in following a tender process will need to come to council for decision. That's all variations to contracts.
That's only tender.
It's only tenders, and we only have about 10 tenders, 10 contracts under tender at the moment. So a lot of the contracts have annual CPI increases. A lot of them have, the asphalt contract has a rise and fall every time the price of asphalt changes. Some of the other contracts, particularly cleaning, if there was a minor variation to the cleaning contract, for example, we vacated 35 Old Perth Road, or the library cleaning contract, cleaning was to be performed by the contractor. All of those sorts of decisions would need to be brought to council.
So can I just ask a subsequent question to that? This is about varying the contract. CPI increases or any of those things would naturally be forming a part of the contract. This is about varying a contract, its conditions, rather than talking about CPI increases. So I'm not sure that that is captured in that. And I also know that under section, where is it, 21.A, I think it is, which is in the following amendment underneath that, which is number 11, that that clause in the Act enables minor variations to tender contracts for just the sort of things that you've actually mentioned. But I'm more looking at the actual variation of the contract, the terms of the contract.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I guess my advice needs to be that insufficient time to consider the full ramifications, given that this came through this afternoon. So I am just advising council that if the delegation is removed, then a lot of decisions in relation to contracts under tender will need to come to council, which impacts operational efficiency. The full extent and scope of that can be worked through. And as you did point out, we don't have an extensive number of tenders, which does limit the impact on operational efficiency somewhat, but the full extent would need to be considered and worked through to determine how many and how regular decisions in terms of contract variations might need to come to council.
So I am going to mention that this was a question that I had in an email that I sent to the CEO on the 30th of November, and that I have only got responses to those questions today. So this was one of those questions.
And yes, and I've prepared draft questions to those shortly after the 30th of November, but given what my understanding was today that this was going to be moved to a workshop for a more fulsome discussion, that's why they haven't been finalised and distributed to council at this point.
Councillor McLennan.
I'm just seeking to understand your concern about leaving this particular delegation to the workshop as per the officer recommendation.
I did actually frame my questions. I provided feedback as requested in the bulletin and provided the feedback. I didn't receive the responses to those questions. The briefing document was the first that I saw that there was a potential suggestion to defer the item. I followed up with another email requesting answers to my questions, which I didn't receive until today. In the absence of answers to the questions, I actually drafted an amendment, which you see before you. I don't consider the amendment to be particularly difficult. In fact, I've been rather conservative in the amendments I've put forward. So this stems from a contract variation that recently happened, and
I understand all that background. And I understand that you want to have a discussion, but just in light of what Mr. White has said, that he's not fully prepared to provide us the advice on the implications of this, I'm wondering why you want to do it right now as opposed to in February, when there aren't going to be any decisions about tenders made over the Christmas period.
I suppose I'm not sure what would change? Sorry. Okay, I will let others ask questions. Councillor Carter first, then Councillor Ames.
Yes, given that we are meant to be voting on the officer's recommendation tonight, and we're talking about moving this to a workshop, I don't quite understand what the process is there. Are we just extracting some things from the delegation register to talk about?
Through Madam Mayor, the staff recommendation is to amend the delegation register to the extent set out in the report, broadly in the tables between pages 76 and 77, but noting Madam Mayor's concerns with a small number of the delegations in terms of contracts and tenders, given that that needs more work to flesh out the implications of any material changes. We simply acknowledge that in part 3 of the recommendation to be discussed at a subsequent workshop early in the new year. And as advised last week, Council resolves to amend the delegations tonight. There is nothing stopping the Council from amending it next February and any subsequent meeting of Council thereafter.
Councillor Ames?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to Mr Gibson. Would be able to amend the officer's recommendation to include point 1 and point 3.
Through Madam Mayor, is that to say that
we can delete point 2?
That would mean Council is not adopting the amended delegations. It would seemingly have discharged its obligations to review the delegations in the calendar year as per point 1, and choosing to make no changes is certainly over to Council. But I would note if I can, sorry, Councillor, that some of the changes are to bring the delegations into line with the overarching legislation. And if Council is willing to wait another 2 or 3 months to correct that, that's certainly over to Council, but equally, staff recommend that occur now.
Councillor McLennan.
I'm happy to move officer recommendation.
I'm happy to second.
Okay, cool.
So we've got a mover and a seconder. I did have a alternative which I will move if this fails. We'll go to debate. So obviously I'm against. So would you like to open, Councillor McLennan?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't think there's anything more to add. I think we're going around in circles here. This is going to be brought up in our workshop in the new year. Obviously, the recommendation in point 2, we need to sort of get onto this from a legislative perspective. So let's tick the box and move on.
And also briefly, I've just heard our Director of Corporate Service saying that he has not had time to prepare fulsome advice for Council, so I'd be much more willing to wait to February to hear from the staff about any implications about changes we make to that particular delegation, and I'm more than happy to Council to adopt the others that are outlined in the report.
Okay. Councillors, I don't believe that the Thank you, Councillor. I will speak against the officer's recommendation because I don't believe that the amendments I put forward are onerous. There are only 10 tenders a year with this council. Some of those tenders go for 3 years, so it would be interesting to see how many per year actually come up. So I also know that I had provided my feedback on this in advance before the briefing documents were even created, that I had expected to have some feedback back on those emails, and that I actually sent the emails twice to try and garner that feedback. In the absence of that feedback, I proceeded with creating these amendments. Some of them are very minor. The one that I'm most concerned about is function 10 from the tender section, and that relates to making amendments to a contract that has already been entered into. Whether it's an amendment to the contract in its initial phase, or whether it's an amendment to a subsequent extension of contract. Nevertheless, clearly there is a issue there in that if a contract can be amended without council being aware of it, then we might have some issues. Now, the other interesting issue as well is that there are contracts that are entered into before any of us are on council. And one of them is that waste supply contract, which was entered into in March 2017 before most of us were on council. And I actually had to go back through the agendas to find the content of that resolution of council to understand what was part and parcel of that contract. So there are some anomalies here where we're expected to know what's in a contract, the contents of a contract, and yet we don't. So part of my suggestions have been that amendments to contracts are not made without us being briefed. I consider that to be good governance. That's it. That's all I consider it. It's not about trust. It's not about anything like that. I consider it being good governance to be informed. So I will not support this particular item going through as is, and I'll leave it at that. Speakers for the item. Speakers against the item, I think we have Councillor Polifka.
Happy to do so. We're dealing with delegations, so this is for the benefit of council. Council saying, don't bring these matters before us. We're happy to delegate that so that it can be dealt with administratively. I'm of the view that if any councillor, any mayor, wants to bring a particular delegation back in and have that additional matter come before council, then that is council's prerogative. Council might choose to do so judiciously so that there isn't a large number of matters that otherwise detract from the business of council. But I think that in the first instance, if there's any councillor or mayor that wants to, rein in the delegation, that should be done, and then we can relax that back over time, should it be the case that council deems it no longer appropriate to have involvement on the basis of the ground that the mayor has articulated, which is governance, which is that if councillors or mayor believe that's something that they want to be involved with, I'm more than happy to support that, to give council or that mayor the opportunity to be involved in that work.
Councillors for the officer recommendation, Councillor Wilding.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just very briefly to express that I do share your concerns for the function here, and I do wish to review it. However, you spoke of good governance, and in my mind, withdrawing the delegation without getting the full picture from the officers would be an example of good governance, and I prefer to review it at a workshop as per the officers.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillors against?
Thank you. I just want to clarify, sorry about this, is that tonight we're asked to adopt the amended delegations that were put forward by staff. And then we're talking about bringing the delegations registered to a council workshop to review the broader financial management, the broader financial management delegations. It's got nothing to do with what we're talking about tonight. If we pass this tonight, we have adopted the delegations as put forward. And that's something that I'm too happy about. Thank you.
Councillors for or against before I close this with, okay, final. We have no other councillor. Councillor Ames. Okay, so I'll put that to the vote for the officer's recommendation. All those in favour of the officer's recommendation? I have Councillor McWilliam, yes, Ames and Wilding. So that's carried. Okay, so So 12:13, which is the Arts, Culture and Events Committee meeting. And I don't know if you'd like to speak to this. Councillor McLean, you had a question on this one as well, didn't you?
I didn't have a question really. I just, my screen's not very small, hold on a sec. I just had a very slight amendment I was going to move for the officer's recommendation. Point 7, it currently says, notes the town will continue to deliver a neighbourhood level event for residents to recognise Australia Day. Given the extensive history we have had in discussion around the sensitivities of Australia Day, I would like to propose that point 7 be reworded and say that notes that the town will continue to deliver a neighbourhood level event for residents in conjunction with the citizenship ceremony on January 26th.
So, Councillor McLennan, I've got an amendment as well, which probably influences what you've suggested. So 12:13, I've deleted point 7 because it actually talks further up in the body of the officer recommendation about delivering local neighbourhood and district scale events. I think it's point 2 for 2022. You could say 2022 or 23 financial year and beyond, and you'd cover both point 7 and point 2. Point 7 was, and I'll just briefly run this past Donna Shaw. I've added a point 7, requests the staff to provide a report to the next ACE meeting on the suitability of the vacant demountable located at the tennis courts to be offered via an EOI process for revolving half-yearly artist residency programs. Now, this was discussed at the ACE meeting, however, it didn't actually make it onto the minutes, and so I would like to actually include that into the this is an amendment, and I'd like to ask you, Ms. Shaw, if you have any issues with that. It's just asking for a report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We have no objections to that, and we've actually started investigating that to be included in the next agenda.
I thought it was an oversight rather than, yeah. So the officers have no problem with that, but I'd ask you, Councillor McLennan, given that point 2 mentions notes that the town will deliver local, neighbourhood and district scale events for the remainder of the 22-23 financial year, if we added and beyond, would that actually cover your concerns? Because it's got Australia Day.
No, it doesn't have Australia Day there, does it?
Yeah, you wanted Australia Day removed, correct?
I just don't think it reflects what previous decisions have been around. We're not holding the event to recognise Australia Day. We're holding the event because it's mandatory that we have a citizenship ceremony on that day. And I think it's important that there is a specific position on what we're doing on that day, which is why I think leaving point 7 in would be better.
So if we, perhaps, Councillor McLennan, if you're potentially amenable to this, if we include your amendment and my amendment, would you be happy for that to happen?
Yeah, that's fine. I'm not sure if our minutes clerk has the wording of both of them.
Yes, so point 7 now reads, notes the town will continue to deliver a neighbourhood level event for residents in conjunction with the annual citizenship ceremony. And now there's a point 8.
Oh, on January 26th.
And then there's a additional point 8, which is red. Councillor Hamilton's. Request the staff provide a report to the next ACE meeting.
Yep.
Sorry, I didn't hear that. Yes, you certainly may.
Through you, Madam Mayor, just to make councillors aware, and this is not to the council's decision making on this item, but we have recently been successful and we are routinely successful in most years in receiving a grant from the Australia Day Council with the objectives of that particular group quite obvious. So that is not to say council needs to use the term Australia Day, but council should at least be mindful of the fact that we are receiving funds on an annual basis from the Australia Day Council.
My reading of the proposed amendment wouldn't negate our ability?
Not at all, Madam.
Yeah.
Certainly, information.
So, councillors, are there any other questions on this item? So,
I've got a question.
Councillor Polifka, yes?
As regards item 7, are we effectively changing that resolution from the positive to the negative, from the inclusion to the exclusion?
Would you like to read out, Ms. Holmes, would you like to read out point 7 again for Councillor Polifka?
Point 7 now reads, notes the town will continue to deliver a neighbourhood level event for residents in conjunction with the annual citizenship ceremony on 26th January.
So did you hear that, Councillor Polifka?
So we're replacing Australia Day with annual citizenship ceremony on 26th January.
We already do the annual citizenship ceremony on that date anyway, so
Yes, I'm aware of what the 26th January is. So we're just essentially, instead of calling it Australia Day, we're calling it 26th January. Is that what's occurring?
I will let
can I just say, it's seeking to clarify which citizenship ceremony it is referring to.
So, sorry, I just responding to what was the amendment was read out. It said citizenship ceremony on 26th January. So I might ask you a question as to which that's to refer to.
Okay. I don't know how to answer that. Okay, councillors.
Can we, just in terms of the voting, can we bundle up items 1 through 6 and then have item 7 separate?
So you want to vote against item 7? Is that how
Yes, that's correct. I don't see any point in saying 26th January instead of Australia Day. So I'm happy to vote against that.
Okay, well, there is an extra dot point that I put in there as well, and
no objection to that.
So shall I? Yeah, I can do that. Yes. Okay, so councillors, I will remove what. So can we swap those points around so it will become point 8, which I will remove from the bulk of the recommendation. We will vote on the point 8 first, and if it is successful, then it will be included into the main part of the resolution. Okay, so point 8 will be the citizenship ceremony one. Yes. Okay. So for everyone to be clear, can we just read that out one more time? This is what we are going to vote on. We need a mover and a seconder for this item, and we will probably go to debate on this. Are you happy with that,
Well,
Councillor?
I've already moved. I've already moved the officer recommendation with 2 points. So
okay, Councillor Polifka, we've already got a mover and a seconder for the amended resolution, the amended officer recommendation. So we're going to go with that because Councillor McLean has already moved it, and you can vote against.
Well, can we not still decide how we're to vote on that? I understand that it's all been moved. In terms of that, if I want to vote in favour of the majority of it, it's just one amendment which has been made on the floor this evening, which substantially changes part of it. Surely I'm entitled to have the opportunity to vote against that one particular part.
If you could hold for a moment, Councillor Polifka.
Excuse me, Madam Mayor. I think my point was you didn't need a new mover and seconder for the officer recommendation.
No.
You've already got that.
Yes, I know. I'm just. Okay, Councillor Polifka, we've got a mover and a seconder, and we're going to proceed with that amended officer recommendation. And sorry, Councillor Wilding.
Sorry, Madam Mayor, just to clarify procedurally, would it be open to Councillor Polifka to foreshadow that he moved the officer recommendation without the amendment?
Yes.
yep, happy to do it in that way.
Okay. Right. So we have Councillor McLennan has moved the officer's recommendation with 2 amendments, her amendment and mine. And we have Councillor Ames who seconded this. I can't.
No.
I just seconded. Right. Sorry. I am so lost on this one. So, right, councillors, we have a mover and a seconder. Do we have anyone against?
Yes.
Yes, we do. Okay.
Against that, happy to foreshadow
Yep.
recommendation with your amendment, Madam Mayor, but not with Councillor McLennan's amendment.
Okay.
I can speak to that once the mover has an opportunity to do so.
So we move to debate. Councillor McLennan. Councillor McLennan is not going to debate. I will actually just add a few words. I actually do think that there is a movement in this country to look at the whole Australia Day question. I don't have an objection to the amendment that Councillor McLennan has put forward. Basically, I think it acknowledges that Australia Day, that the tag Australia Day has some connotations that are negative for some parts of our community. Last year at the Birack ceremony that I attended, it was an incredible event. It was a different vibe. It had a unified type mode happening with all members of the community enjoying what was a different style of event. It opened my eyes to how incredibly diverse our community is and how interesting it can be to approach events from a different angle. So from that respect, I would encourage all councillors to attend the event that happens on the 26th of January, where we have a citizenship ceremony and we have a multitude of different entertainments happening. It does not focus exclusively on patriotism or Australia Day. It focuses on unifying our community in celebration of all the things that make this country great. So in that respect, I think that if there are words and things that separate us and make us not join together in these celebrations, I would prefer to put them aside for, those occasions where we can celebrate as a community. So I have no problems with the amendment put forward by Councillor McLennan. Councillor Polifka, you're against. If you would like to make your debate.
Yeah, certainly. The argument's either way well known, and people on both sides of that debate. Debates are problems. They are divisive. Australia Day itself, the word Australia Day, I don't think that's the issue. I think it's the choice of the date, which is the issue for a large number of people. So until that has been changed, I would still be wanting to celebrate Australia Day. I don't really care what day it's on. But let's have a day where we celebrate Australia. We're all Australians. We're all going to celebrate. So I think it's the date that's more problematic than the day. And that's my objection to that, is that until such time that that's changed, that's I think something which people are actively agitating for, and something which may well change in the near future. But it will always remain, not the date, but the concept of celebrating our national day, regardless of what day that's on, that still needs to occur. So in favour of Australia Day, and as to what day that's on, that doesn't matter to be determined. But wanting to celebrate Australia and all Australia.
Thank you, Councillor Polifka. Councillors, any other councillors who would wish to debate for, against? So I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour of the amended officer recommendation. Councillor McLennan, Councillor McWilliam, Councillor Carter, Councillor Ames, Councillor Wilding, Councillor Hamilton. Against? Against Councillor Polifka. So that's carried. Sorry, you didn't get a chance with your foreshadowed motion, Thank you everyone for that one. Okay, we now move on to 12:14, which is the Audit and Governance Committee meeting on the 30th of November. Councillor McLennan, you're moving that?
No.
Oh, yes.
No, I had a question.
Sorry, I realise I'm tired. You do have an amendment.
No, but I have some questions first. Just for our Director of Corporate Services, in the report it refers to some meetings that have been held with National Australia Bank and CBA about the green term deposits. Just wanted to confirm that there's anything in the policy as it's currently written that would prevent us from being able to make use of those if they were suitable for the town?
Through you, Madam Mayor, no, absolutely not.
Excellent. And as Madam Mayor has suggested, I did circulate an amended motion which relates specifically to the draft investment policy. So in particular, the maximum percentage that we could invest in A2 and what's the word I'm looking for, Mr. White? The percentages for
Interest rate tolerance.
that's it. Yeah, interest rate tolerance. And I just wanted to. Oh, sorry, Councillor Prolifica can't hear me. I just wanted to confirm that what I proposed in the amended motion. I think you've indicated that there's no real concern from the administration is in alignment with one of the options that was presented to the Audit and Governance Committee.
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, there's no objections from the administration to the proposed amendments.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry, councillors. So we have Councillor McLennan's amendments. Councillor Prolifica, you want to ask questions on this, is that correct?
Okay, so we'll move straight into the amendment.
Oh, no. You can ask questions. Sorry, I was late seeing your hand up. Apologies.
Okay. Okay, in terms of what we're seeking to do here, so this came from the Audit and Risk Committee. The intention there was effectively to give some quantitative guidance to administration as to what council's appetite was and the extent to which they were prepared to forego income based on objections to the lending practices of particular financial institutions with regard to those institutions providing credit to organisations that are in some way involved in fossil fuels. Is that essentially what we were seeking to do, to provide that quantitative measure?
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, that's correct. The council has previously indicated a preference to invest in financial institutions that do not fund or support the fossil fuels industry, and at present, with the current limitations of the policy, the administration feels that it's lacking some guidance from council, so brought this proposal to the Audit and Governance Committee with a view to seeking the committee advising council and subsequently council decision in terms of whether it's council prepared to accept an interest rate, a slightly lower interest rate for the town's investments in lenders that do not support the fossil fuel industry, and if so, what that tolerance might be.
And this was a resolution of a differently constituted council, and now the current council needs to effectively, I suppose, fill in the gaps in terms of the extent of that tolerance.
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's expressed in a current council policy, which is due for review. So the impetus really was the review of the policy, and in line with that review, the previous council resolutions were obviously considered by the administration when we were reviewing that policy.
And it would be council to not accept any differential. That is to say that we will seek to maximise our return.
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, that's open to council.
And from that, I suppose the baseline of prioritising financial return at the other end of the spectrum is the current amendment, which is the highest of the three options that were provided to the Audit and Risk Committee, and that is that we would be prepared to forego up to 10% or 50 basis points of the interest that we would receive should other organisations be fossil fuel lenders. So we were prepared to forego up to 10% or 50 basis points to find that lender that fit that criteria.
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, that's broadly correct. So the 50 basis points is a cap which cannot kick in until such time as interest rates of 5% or more are available to the town. I think I put an example in the paper to the committee that if the best available interest rate to the town was say 3%, for example, for a particular investment the town was looking to make, that the effect of the proposed amendments tonight would be that the town would accept an interest rate of 2.7% or more from an entity that doesn't provide funding to the fossil fuel industry. That's not to say that...
Well, those figures are wild guesses. I mean, those are very informed views as to what we are likely to receive.
I guess I was just going to finish by saying that's not to say that for all investments the town might seek to make, the full breadth of that interest rate tolerance would be required. So in the case I just cited, it may well be that we could achieve an equivalent or even a higher interest rate from a non-fossil fuel lender, or we may be able to achieve 2.8% or 2.9%, or we may need to go down to 2.7%, depending on what was available in the marketplace at the time. But the effect of the officer recommendation, or indeed the proposed amendment, is to provide a limit on that so that it's not unfettered.
No, and I think the total amount, should everything align, which the town would potentially forego, so the maximum cost, if you will, I think you expressed that to be around $27,000 a year?
Yes. I'll just confirm the exact figure, but I think that's correct. Sorry.
It was 27. Councillor Polifka, I have Councillor McLennan who'd like to ask a question as well.
I just wanted to confirm a couple of things. So, Mr. White, these are things that I think I've heard you say to me, and I just wanted to make sure that I've got them correct. So, you said that there may not even be a loss of revenue.
That's through you, Madam Mayor. That's potentially the case if interest rates are competitive. There is a potential for a loss of revenue. What we found is perhaps on our shorter term investments that we sometimes make from time to time for cash flow, we found that generally speaking the non-fossil fuel lenders are a touch lower, but
at present.
At present, but that doesn't need to be the case, and sometimes we have actually attracted a higher interest rate from a non-fossil fuel lender than a fossil fuel lender. So,
and I think I heard you say that the figures that Councillor Polifka was just quoting that you had in your report were theoretical possible maximums, and that the potential loss can't possibly be that high in reality.
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, so there are sort of two sets of figures in the report. This is the report to the Audit Committee. I'm looking at page 14 of the agenda. The first was a theoretical maximum, and that was if all of the town's funds were invested, and the maximum interest rate tolerance was what we had to accept to invest all of those funds. That is a theoretical maximum, that can't be achieved. Then there was a set of figures based on some assumptions, and those assumptions were that 60% of the town's available funds were invested in at an interest rate of either whatever the tolerance was, 1%, 5%, or 10% lower. So in the example we provided, 60% of the town's funds available for investment at any given time during the year were invested at 90% of what could otherwise be achieved. So if that's the case, and those two assumptions are fully satisfied for all of the town's investments, then the potential loss of revenue is $27,900 for a year.
Thank you.
So, councillors, do we have any more questions before we move to Councillor?
I just have one further question.
Councillor Plivka, then I've got Councillor McLennan as again.
So, in terms of what we're seeking to achieve here, we're obviously trying to discourage financial institutions from providing funds to the fossil fuel industry. That's a good thing. Do we have any evidence that the town of Bassendean by itself, as opposed to uniting with, say, all local governments, in taking a stand like this, is actively altering the behaviour of these financial institutions, or are we simply costing ourselves money without altering their behaviour at all?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm not sure I have any particular insight into that anyone else in the room doesn't have, but what I can say is that we have seen some movement in the marketplace in terms of current fossil fuel lenders and their awareness that government entities, and in particular local government, which across Australia has significant funds invested in these financial institutions, in offering a broader array of products, particularly in the green space. So clearly the town, with its average funds under investment of $15 million at any given time during the year, is a fairly minor player in the marketplace. So I think that's a given, but I think there is a push coming from somewhere. At least the major financial institutions are starting to design some greener products.
Well, I suppose just putting that another way, I mean, an organisation, they're going to take on deposit $15 million from the town of Bassendean, they pay us interest, and that's going to produce a certain amount of profit for them. How does that then compare to the interest that a bank is going to make on doing business with BHP?
So, Councillor Plivka, I think we're heading into speculation here, and
yeah, we're happy to leave that example hanging and to leave it at that.
So, Councillor Plivka, and now I've got Councillor McLennan. I actually am going to wind up questions now.
I'm not asking a question. I'm trying to move the motion.
Excellent. Councillor McLennan has moved her amendment. So, do we have a seconder? Councillor McWilliam, do we have anyone against?
Against to foreshadow the original recommendation.
Okay, so we have Councillor Plivka against. We'll move to debate. Councillor McLennan.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thanks, Paul, to you and the team for all your efforts over the last few years to try and.
Sorry, I can't hear.
Do you want to turn it around so that?
Okay.
I don't think it's connected. Okay, I'll do my best. But yes, anyway, I was trying to thank you for your efforts, not only on this policy, but over the recent years to try and fulfil Council's desire to divest. As has been noted, the essentially what was option 3 in the Audit and Governance Committee report is not something that I made up, but something that was proposed by the town's administration as a viable option for us to consider. And when this came to the Audit and Governance Committee, there was very little discussion because the committee recognised that this was really a values-based decision that would need to come to council for us to consider. So the committee decided just to put the middle of the road option forward, knowing that we would have a conversation about it at tonight's meeting. So really what we're proposing is just a slight increase in the town's tolerance to enable us to transact with institutions that do not finance the fossil fuel industry. And it's also proposed that we slightly broaden our investment diversity options by increasing our A2 maximum to 70% in order to help mitigate the potential revenue loss or any potential revenue loss from preferencing non-fossil fuel aligned institutions. And this combined with recent improvements to the town's cash flow and the use of a market provider to assist us, any loss of revenue may be very small, if at all. So I'll just encourage councillors to think about this as literally putting our money where our mouth is. If we are serious when we talk about taking local action on climate change, we can't then choose to make a decision contrary in order to avoid a fairly small theoretical potential loss of revenue. We've heard from Mr. White, who proposed this as an option, that there may not be a loss of revenue, and there's no reason this will absolutely occur. We know that climate change is a major issue for our community and communities around Australia more broadly, and people expect their leaders to take action to protect the future of our environment for current and future generations. While they want us to invest public funds responsibly, they don't expect their money to be funding fossil fuel projects that are counterproductive to limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. So despite the urgent need to stop global warming, there's havoc being wreaked on our land, our air and our water across Australia, because many of our banks continue to play a critical role in supporting the fossil fuel industry. The institutions that have custody of our money should use it to protect and not damage our environment. And as a community, we have the power to change the big banks and ensure that public money is used as a force for good. This is about our community being part of and doing our part in holding account custodians of our money to ensure that it's used to the benefit of our environment. And while I fully appreciate that financial sustainability is a key part of our town, in order to secure a positive future, we also hold strong values around being responsible custodians. And to compromise on these values in order to avoid a theoretical possible loss of revenue is putting a potential short-term, relatively small profit over a long-term cost to the environment. And I think that's really hypocritical of us. I do acknowledge that the town of Bassendean is small. We don't change the world on our own, but it's through the combination of people like us sitting around council tables and other institutions around the nation, around the world, that together can make a difference. So I'd encourage you to support this amended motion, and we can then ensure that our community's money is not helping to further climate change.
Thank you, Councillor McLennan. Councillor McWilliam?
Thank you,
Okay. Councillor Polifka?
Just Councillor McLennan, well on how this is hypothetical. If we are able to obtain products from non-fossil fuel lenders on the same terms, then we wouldn't need this differential. We could revert back to the officer's recommendation, which provided for a differential of 5%, capped to 25 basis points. So, calling it hypothetical, if it is hypothetical, and if we're never going to reach those limits, then why do we need to extend the limit to 10%? I'll tell you why we're extending it to 10%, is so that we can reach that target, because these non-fossil fuel lenders are not able to provide interest to us to the same extent as the other lenders at present. So what we are being asked to do, we're being asked to forego up to 10% of what could potentially be the interest that we would receive, for the purpose of causing these financial institutions that would be fossil fuel lenders to change their ways. Now, we have not been, nobody's been able to say that there is evidence that this decision that we would be making would cause those entities to change their ways. So what we do know is that this has the potential to cost us up to $27,000 a year. So that's what we do. The effect it's going to have on changing the lending behaviour, we don't have any evidence. We're simply speculating that that's something that might occur. If we were a larger block, if we were all local governments, it was a global-led initiative, then yes, we would have significantly more clout, and that may be sufficient to alter larger financial institutions' lending practices. At present, what we're doing is we're allowing the potential for money to be removed from our coffers, which could be applied more locally towards climate initiatives. The rationale for not investing in fossil fuel is because fossil fuel creates carbon dioxide. You plant more trees are pretty good for removing carbon dioxide from the environment. So what we can do is apply that money more locally. We are, I think, trying to deal with a much larger issue. We're Whereas what we do have the ability to do at a local level is to apply that money towards environmental initiatives. The whole idea of think globally, act locally, whereas we seem to be wanting to influence banking institutions on a national and international level from the town of Bassendean. Well, that's admirable. If we were to band together with more local governments, then yes, that may well be something which could be achieved. But as it presently stands, what's being asked is to forego up to 10% of the income that we can derive based on speculation that this may well temper the behaviour of larger financial institutions. So my concern is that this doesn't align with the strategic community plan, where we're looking to give paramountcy to preserving the financial position of Bassendean, which is important. The only way in which Bassendean can do good in the world is Bassendean continues to exist. So I'm hoping that we get our financial situation in order. And it's small things like this which assist. It might only be $27,000 a year here, $27,000 a year there. It all adds up. So I think, given that the financial situation, that we're looking to be very careful with our funds, that we just can't afford to go to 10%. Happy to go to 5%.
Councillor Politico, I'm going to wind you up.
That's it. Thank you.
Any other councillors for or against? Okay, so we'll go to final argument.
Well, can I just say a couple of very quick things? When the Bassendean Council first committed to divestment, I think it was back in 2016, and at the time there was lots of communication with other local governments, and I was speaking to Mr. White earlier today, and at the time the City of Stirling hadn't committed to divest, yet their Chief Financial Officer had been doing a lot of work to make sure that their investments were achieving the highest rate of interest return. And at that time, they had, I think it was at least 60, it may have been a bit more, % of the City of Stirling's funds invested in non-fossil fuel-aligned institutions because they were delivering the highest interest rates at the time. So I think that's a very real possibility, especially as coal and oil and gas projects become less and less viable, that those institutions that aren't funding them will see benefits. I completely understand Councillor Politica's point about planting more trees and so on. I think realistically, we're planting 1,000 trees every year, which is more, I believe, per area than any other local government in WA. And I don't think Mr. Adams' team really wants us to up that. And the amount we're talking about with an extra, say, $20,000 is really insignificant when you look at the life of a tree. Councillor Politica said we can't afford to. I would say the opposite. We can't afford not to. This is about each of us doing our bit to make sure that we do have a safe environment for the future. And just humour I'm going to read you something. You'd all be aware of the Adani mine that had huge public opposition. So I think the owner of that mine is the second most wealthy person in the world. And he just did an interview with Financial Times, and he said, if we realised that there was so much objection, that so much resistance would come, we would not have entered, we would not have done it. And it's just a really powerful example of the potential effect that people coming together, taking the action that they can take within their circle of influence can have on changing the direction of these kind of projects. So this is a small role that we can play, and I'd encourage councillors to take the opportunity to do what we can.
Councillors, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour of the amended recommendation? So we have Councillor McWilliam, McLennan, Carter, Ames, Wilding, Hamilton, and against?
Yes.
Okay, Councillor Politica against. Councillors, thank you for your debate and your energy and your commitment to your beliefs. There are no motions of which Okay, sorry. Yes, so we'll do it under confidential Source, Councillor Wilding, Secretary Councillor McLennan, and the recording needs to go off. So councillors, if we can wait for a minute for the recording to go off.